Hello, welcome to Interval Learning with Gene Petty. This chapter is about sevenths. And in front of us here we have a few major sevenths and minor sevenths in a distant horizon. Now, sevenths are important to know because they're the reason that you keep seeing and playing those chords that have a 7 next to them. So when you see a G7 or a C7, it's one of those curious E major sevens. Now you might be able to grasp a little more what those are about. When you know where and why the seventh is in the chord, you won't be at a loss in performing these chords or mixing them up with each other. The interval of a major seventh and a minor seventh are drastically different in form and function. There are several 7 chords in major and minor keys. Don't worry about that I mentioned keys again. We're going to end up looking at them more in part 2 in the scales section. But if not for the interval of a minor seventh, history of music would have been quite different, because this humble interval creates the dominant 7th chord, and dominant 7th chords are those basic letter chords with a 7 next to them. A7, G7, D7. They are powerful chords that usually force the music back to a home key chord. Here's a D7, and there's your G. It brings you back to G. D7 wants to go to G. There's more to it than that, but throughout most of Western classical music, the dominant 7th chord is usually the penultimate, that is the second to last chord in almost every piece. It wasn't until the last century that blues, jazz, and rock used the dominant 7th chord to end a tune. And you've probably heard this kind of ending. That's 2 dominant 7th chords. That's a different use than in classical music. But as you see, the 7th is an important interval. So, in order to understand 7th intervals, we'll look at the major 7th first and then the minor 7th. Most people have trouble locating a 7th because they think they need to count up 7 notes from the first note. Going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it takes a long time. Well, when you get over this hump, it'll be easier to think of 7th as a step or half step from the octave. A quick example would be to think of a 7th from C. Instead of counting letters C, D, E, F, G, A, B, it is much easier to think BC, thinking of the C and moving down or backwards 1 letter. We need to think of these letter note names derived from the alphabet as not just a linear A through G, but in going all directions, backwards, forwards, and sideways. From now on, start becoming more flexible with your note letter names. You should be able to say G, F, E, D, C, B, A as easy as you say A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So major 7ths. I'll now throw some random major 7ths at you. And let's see if you can get the general idea. Here's C to B. C to B. That's a major 7th. D to C sharp. Do you hear how close it is to the octave? If I raise that C sharp to a D, it gives the D octave. But we're talking about a major 7th, which is 1/2 step below the octave. It has that peculiar sound. Now E to D sharp. E to D sharp, major 7th. F to E. All right. Has a peculiar sound, but let's say we just do them in a row here. Get used to it. C, B, D, C sharp, E, D sharp, F, E. Okay? Now, always count from the bottom up. This is what you have to do in the beginning. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Line, space, line, space, line, space, line. It's a little involved, but do it a few times just to get used to that at first. And then let's try to find a shortcut. If you remember your minor seconds, you could turn them upside down and have a major seventh. So B to C, there's that jaws sound. That's a minor second sound. B to C. And if we turn it upside down, bring the C down to an octave, C down to an octave, and with the B, we still have the B there. We get the major seventh. Now, it sounds a little maybe uncomfortable, but if we add the major third and the perfect fifth, we get a C major seventh chord out of that. Let me just play the C major chord first. Okay, you know this chord probably. And now, if we drop the first finger, it'll become a B, and the chord becomes a C major seventh. That's not what it says on the chart here, on the right-hand graph. That's a C major chord again, but if we drop that first finger and put a 0 on top, it'll be a C major seventh. Now, we've turned this peculiar sounding interval into a beautiful chord. In fact, people write songs like this. With that chord, the beginning of Chicago tune, Color My World. They also have a tune with major seventh chords called Beginnings, something like this. These are two major seventh chords. So I'm explaining the use of the sevenths in chords so that you can have some context to fall back on. As you heard before, the interval itself is a little hard to grasp, but chords are not our main concern here. Nevertheless, if you can hear the drastic changes produced by the seventh within a chord, you'll realize the importance of the interval itself. So let's take our major seventh and bring the distance a little closer by a half step. Major seventh, we're going to bring it down closer to the C by a half step, and you get a minor seventh. That's the sound of a minor seventh. Do not confuse intervals with chords. Just because we form a major seventh chord with a major seventh interval does not mean that a minor seventh chord will occur if we only use a minor seventh interval or something like that. If we were to continue in the same manner as above and lower the top note in the chord, we don't get a minor seventh chord, but rather a dominant seventh chord, or simply what they call a C7 chord, which I was talking at length about earlier. Major and minor chords are determined by third, not the seventh. Again, it's a little confusing because we're not talking about keys yet. Just keep that in mind. The chords are here to help you get a better understanding of how sevenths affect other notes in chords. Hey, watch how the B flat, or C to B flat, changes the C major to a C major seventh, and then into a C7 chord. So here's our C major. We're dropping the C to a B. So there's a major 7th chord in there, a major 7th interval in the major 7th chord. And now the minor 7th in the C7 chord. So we'll do that again. Okay, C major, C major 7th, and C 7th, also known as C dominant 7th chord. But the interval is the C minor 7th. So the first chord has the C octave outlining it. The C major 7th chord uses the CB, which forms a C major 7th chord. The C7 uses the B flat, which forms the interval of a minor 7th on the lowest and uppermost notes. Since we're concentrating on intervals and not chords, the next exercise will be removing the middle or chordal notes and using only the bottom and top notes. So, for a couple minutes, play 3 intervals in a row. As you read them, for each interval, say octave, major 7th, minor 7th. Starting on low E to the octave, play them together. Now we're going to bring the octave down to D sharp. And we say major 7th. And here we go to this, what would be a 7th chord, we say minor 7th. There should be a little M next to that 7 there. And now we look at the fingering charts below so you can get a visual on it. Now go back up and read the notes. E, E, D sharp, E, D natural. Here's a case where I had to say natural because the sharp was preceding it. Alright, for 2 minutes play the 3 intervals in a row as you read them. For each interval say octave, major 7th, minor 7th. Starting on A. Here's your A, octave above. Play them together. Octave, major 7th, 7, minor 7th. And here's the fingering charts. A, G sharp, and then A to G natural. Are you beginning to hear things? Here's a D. Let's play a D octave. Major 7th. 7th. Did you get lost on that one? Well, here's your fingering charts. Help you out. D. C sharp. C. So try this on G to G octave and G to F sharp, major 7th. G to F natural, minor 7th. You get a good look at these. Listen to them. Octave, major 7th, minor 7th. And that'll just wrap up the exercises on the 7ths and the video on the 7ths. And we have one more video on intervals that'll describe more about the qualities of the intervals. So review any of these that you need to look at. Get the sound in your head now. And after we look at this next video, we're going to go have some tests, okay? So, I hope you've been sticking along and enjoying this. Take your time, no rush. This is Gene Petty. See you in the next video.